BMW විකුණු පහන විතරක්ම වෙන්නේ නැති ගන්න.
ඕන වාහනයක් ගන්නවා.
පරණ වාහනයක්
ගන්නවා.
පාර්ට්ස් හැම හොයා ගන්න අමාරු කාර් එකක්
ගන්නවා.
සල්ලි ගන්න විකුණනකන් ඉන්න වෙන්නේ.
පැය 3න් සල්ලි දෙනවා.
ලීසින් කරලා තිබුණොත්
ලීස් එක සෙටල් කරලා අපි ගන්නවා.
කොකටත් එක ෂුවර් කරගන්න හැබැයි.
අපෙන් නොගත්තත් අපි ගන්නවා.
A person can live for days without food. In fact, many hours without water, even a few minutes without air. However, without hope, one could not survive a single second. Same applies for business. In a time filled with negativity, one needs hope to move on. In fact, hope may be one of the most scarcest commodities in the Sri Lankan business community these days. And here in Bisnomics, we intend to make this 1 hour your most hopeful business hour. And how do you really build a brand during these tough times? How does one connect with the market when the market is filled with so much of negative news and so much of other related concerns? I'm Tharindra Amarasekara, and today we will be in discussion with Mr. Santosh Mennon, who is the Chairman CEO of FCBKL.lk, a specialist advertising firm, on how exactly do we connect and build strong brands during these tough times. Mr. Mennon, absolute pleasure to have you and welcome to Bisnomics.
Thank you for having me, Tarindu.
Mr. Santosh, let's get right to the point. Now, there is no denying that there's a lot of negativity that is ringing and doing the rounds in the minds of Sri Lankans, because from the moment we wake up in the morning, we hear about this queue and that queue, and it's gone to a point where we hear about how many people have died in the queues. There simply doesn't seem to be any light at the end of the tunnel. That's how bad it is right now. But how does a marketer, because as we always say, we say this in media, we say this in the entertainment world, and we say this in business, the show must go on. So a marketer has to do his job and keep the business moving forward, connecting with the people. How can a marketer build a more positive tone around their brand or business, even though there is so much of negativity out there in the market and in the minds of people? Let's start with that.
Great. I mean, a very valid question, Tarindu, in the given circumstances. But you know, I have a very strong point of view on this. The fact of the matter is, brands are sources of immense joy. And let me tell you what I mean.
Immense joy.
Immense joy. And let me tell you what I mean by this. So, you know, as human beings, our body has 3 hormones which give happiness. It's dopamine, it's serotonin, and it's oxytocin. These are the 3 hormones.
I love it how you are giving this a scientific twist.
Yes, and it's very interesting because if you take dopamine, dopamine actually, when you get rewards and validation, there is a surge of dopamine in your body, and that's a happy hormone. When you see acts of kindness, or when you do acts of kindness even, there's a surge of serotonin in your body. It's a happy hormone. When you cuddle somebody or even your pet, it's called the love hormone. It's oxytocin. Now what happens if you look at brands, irrespective of whether society is going through a positive or negative time, is always positive. That's how brands build connections with people. So my view on this is the time for brands to go out there and spread their positivity through their own unique brand messages in the marketplace. Very often as marketers, we think that when times are tough, this is the time not to message.
To lie low.
And I think that's the wrong move, because people are looking for happy hormones. People are looking for joyous moments. I mean, if I take a brand like, Nestle's Milkmaid, and they talk about delightful family moments. I mean, we all know that during the pandemic, we were looking for delightful family moments. And there were many delightful family moments that came our way.
So the brand needs to communicate in a manner that creates that joy in the minds, in the hearts of the people, and that immediately connects with the happy hormones, as you said. That's a very interesting viewpoint, Santosh.
Yes.
Now, let's talk about getting the message through, because marketers always talk about breaking the clutter. Am I right? We want to do
yes.
that, because and today we live in a world where we are bombarded with brands, and there are so many brands, and in fact I think due to lack of breaking through to the people, they end up being Me Too brands, as we
Yes,
call it.
yes.
Now, how at a time that the minds of the people are squashed and squeezed with fear and so much of sorrow, sadness, etc., how can the marketers make sure that their message gets through to the people?
The thing is, Tarindu, when your mind is full of fear and worry, you're also seeking some respite. You're normally, so let me ask you, during the pandemic, consciously or unconsciously, there are many people who started doing cooking at home. Men who never knew how to cook before suddenly went into the kitchen and started cooking.
Just to share a personal story, I started making chocolate.
There you go. And what does chocolate give you? Chocolate gives you delight. Chocolate gives you respite.
And a few added pounds and kilos as well.
Well, that's part of the deal, and you have to learn to balance it at some point.
For sure.
But you know what you just said validated what I just said.
Absolutely.
Which is that actually when worries and fears are more, messages of positivity are sought actively. You know, so it's easier in my mind for messages of positivity to actually find receptivity at times like this, because consumers are seeking this. You know, in India, the medium of films, and you mentioned being a Bollywood buff yourself, actually did exceedingly well, because those 3 hours of sitting in the theatre were a respite from the tough survivalist world that many people had. I mean, you know, the industry in India, film industry, is huge.
Correct. Almost 11 million people go to the cinemas every day. That's like half of the population of Sri Lanka, Santosh.
Exactly. You know, I mean, so just imagine the role that cinema plays as a respite giver to the worries and tensions of people who go through stresses and strains of daily survival. You know, brands actually can play a similar role by actively being present in the context of their authentic brand voices for consumers to listen to it, consumers to understand it. And this is the time for them to do it the best. And this is the time when actually we owe it to our consumers to take our authentic voice and represent it in a very powerful way, so that you give hope as brand custodians and as brand owners to consumers who are going through a bad time in their lives. So, you know, my view is very contrarian to what you would normally expect, because there is no defensiveness. I think I'm very clear about, as a brand owner myself and as a brand creator myself, as to why we create brands. And I think this is the reason we create brands.
So you can give brands can give more reasons for people to somewhat rally around the brands in a more happy mindset. I think it's all about the communication, isn't it?
Exactly. I mean, ultimately, there are different aspects to the way in which brands interact with consumers. One aspect of the interaction is through the communications. The other aspect of the interaction is through the experience. And I think the experience provides its own pleasurable moments, with that bite into a biscuit that you love.
Correct.
The bite into a piece of, noodle as a category that you might love having, or a sip of coffee early in the morning when you wake up, is an experience that kind of validates some of the messaging that might be coming to you beforehand, which has already created this intangible connection between you and that brand that you consume.
Yes, because at the end of the day, today, we no longer buy products, we buy the brand experience, isn't it?
Absolutely do.
Santosh, now, when we look at the current scenario, I think we touched upon this earlier, but I would like to get into some more details with you on this matter. Now, they say the brand voice needs to be genuine.
Yes.
And we have seen over the years so many top brands, so many global brands that have been initially loved by the people, but then they get boycotted because they realize that the brand internally was not really living up to what they were preaching on the outside. Now, what exactly do we mean by the term brand voice? Because there are so many different definitions. I think you are the best person to demystify this for us. And on the other hand, what is it that today's Sri Lankan consumers need to hear from the brand voice of the brands they buy?
Yeah. See, I mean, if I were to take specific examples without actually taking a brand name, but I will take some taglines which I think will become clear. People, you'll be clear what brands I'm referring to in that context. There is a toothpaste brand which actually promises happy, beautiful smiles. At the end of the day, they haven't restricted their communication or their connection merely to the
Product.
to the product in terms of what it does for the teeth, but it's gone beyond to an emotion.
Correct.
Because that emotion of smiles, which is a Sri Lankan thing, by the way, and I think the Sri Lankan smile, I don't think is marketed enough. And to that extent, it's fantastic for a brand such as that to have taken that idea and created something so powerful with it. And it has become so much a fabric of Sri Lankan society. And I think there are many, many such examples in Sri Lanka of brands which have done an awesome job of actually connecting and going beyond the product to something that actually captures the essence of what Sri Lankanness is, and connected that very, very beautifully to the brand, so that when consumers look at that brand, there is a sense of deep ownership beyond just the fact of the utility of that product. The pack stands for something far more powerful than just what it's meant to do for you in terms of its utility. I mean, to that extent, finding the voice of a brand is one of the most critical aspects of brand creation. And that voice, once it's found, it can go on for decades. There are sufficient examples. Even in the Sri Lankan market, if you do a cursory check, there will be some brand thoughts which have been in existence for 30, 40, 50 years.
For sure.
Which reflect, the core sentiment of that brand. Of course, in the way it's expressed will change from era to era.
Absolutely.
But the fundamental essence of what that brand stands for and what it represents for the people, will remain the same. Even in some cases, I know brand identities have remained the same. We've had situations in certain brands where the main protagonist has remained the same for 15, 20 years.
Yes.
The way the garments are colored remains the same. Or the kind of colors of the garments that are worn by the models remain the same. There might be a child with a certain hairstyle,
correct,
which actually is part of a brand's identity for years.
Absolutely.
And I think you will know what I'm referring to. But
so, as you very correctly said, one, you need to discover your voice and then make sure that over the generations, though the message can slightly change, the tone of the communication and the core message stays relevant across those generations. I think some wonderful opening thoughts there, Santosh. We are going to come back to you on more details on that.
For sure.
How can we build brands across markets? Especially if you're an export brand, how can you take your product across different markets? Let's talk about that on the other side of the short break. This is Bisnomics. Welcome back to Bisnomics, your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes. I'm Tharadwamarasekara, and we are in conversation with Mr. Santosh Mennon, Chairman CEO of FCBKL.lk, a specialist advertising and brand building firm. Santosh, now, when we look at taking brands across markets, because especially nowadays, a lot of Sri Lankan companies, product brands, service brands, they are looking at how can I take my brand across different markets. How can we take it to India? How can we take it to Europe? How can we take it to the Americas and so on? So as a brand builder, you have built brands across markets for so many different organizations. So as a brand builder, how do you adapt from market to market? And for anybody who is watching this show, who is planning to take their service or product brand across markets, what is your advice to them?
I'll start with a very some anecdotes which happened to me. I traveled once to the UK on a official engagement, and I was in a fairly upscale hotel. I happened to have a meeting with a client there, and the butler there came up to me and said, "Sir, can I engage you with the finest tea from the Emerald Isle of Ceylon. In UK, without me asking, without them knowing that I had come from Sri Lanka, in the Western world, sitting in an upscale hotel, being served a brand which is conceived, created, and developed from here. And then after having that cup of tea, I asked him, why did you specifically say this to me? And he looked puzzled at my question. He said, well, we always try to serve the finest for our guests. And I thought it was incredible that here was a brand from our beautiful island which was able to position itself as the finest tea there is, and present itself and have people in a foreign country present it as such to their guests. And I think there's a lesson there, because there is a certain quality and a certain confidence that brand represents due to what it does with its product, and is able to project that quality and that finesse to an international market, charge premiums and be seen and observed for that quality. Be sure about what we are doing, have a passion, reflect that in the quality, and without any hesitation, go out there and create brands in a manner such as this, so that we have these wonderful anecdotes happening, which we will feel proud of when we go to foreign countries,
For sure. Now, we talk about branding products, and I can see that at the same time, you're also a huge fan of our beautiful nation, Santosh, and you yourself said that you consider yourself a Sri Lankan yourself, and
Yes.
that's great to hear.
Yes.
Now, let's be very open here. These days, whether it's business news channels, whether it's foreign news channels, because end of the day, media is through what a country's image always goes out to the public, even before the brands, etc. What people hear about a country over the media goes on to shape the opinion about that country to a large extent. And Santosh, we can all admit, we can all agree that there's not a lot of good news going about Sri Lanka across media channels around the world. We hear so much of different news about that. They are showing the current fuel crisis. They're showing the current business problems due to those crises. They're showing about the energy crisis. Some recent articles are very loudly speaking about how one powerful family has sent the island nation broke. I mean, we are not talking politics here. We are stating facts. This is an article that was very heavily shared across so many different media platforms, and media platforms that people look to and refer to. So amidst all this, when there's so much of negative emotions and sentiments being shared about Sri Lanka around the world, what can we do to make the brand Sri Lanka a more stronger one out there in the world? How do you think that Sri Lanka can market and brand itself to the world, especially in a time like this? Where do we start? Because no matter what channel we look to, no matter what online news portal we refer to, Santosh, the truth is there's nothing else but negative, sad, and bad news about Sri Lanka right now.
I would say Sri Lanka over the years has been a victim to some extent of imagery which is not always consistent with reality. And I'm saying this very carefully, because I'm not suggesting that the messenger, which is the media, is the problem. But what I'm actually saying is that during the height of war, when Sri Lanka was going through war in 2008, I had an international conference to attend in Barcelona. And we had about 100 delegates from the whole world in that meeting. And they put up my picture as the person representing Sri Lanka. Close to 35 of the delegates had been to Sri Lanka before. Okay. The 35 delegates who had been to Sri Lanka before walked up to me and had so much to talk about the experience of being in this Emerald Island. It was incredible. I felt really good, because I feel that there are a large number of people who have actually come to the island, been in the island, experienced the hospitality, experienced the sheer gift of Mother Nature that Sri Lanka has in abundance. Experienced joy, pleasure of a beautiful holiday and gone back with incredibly beautiful memories of the island. It is up to us now to make use of that, or I wouldn't use the word use, but to in some way bring that out.
To build on that.
To bring that out in support of what this nation actually is. And there is a possibility for us to probably even do a campaign, through social media, asking for the people who know Sri Lanka to stand up and make their voices heard as to what this island nation really is, as a start point. Of course, there is a need to market the island. There is no denying that. And I think there have been several attempts at trying to do that. For whatever reason, it hasn't happened. I know over the last 5 to 10 years, there have been several attempts at trying to get a campaign out to represent what the nation is. But somehow those campaigns don't seem to really, for whatever reason, which is unknown to me, hasn't really seen the light of day in the way it is meant to have actually been been activated.
And at the same time, we see our neighbor, Maldives, that is actually delivering consistent campaigns and getting the message out there.
Yes.
And receiving huge amounts of tourism dollars as well.
Yes, Maldives, Mauritius, Mauritius.
Even Seychelles during the pandemic, just after the pandemic, I believe their currency had appreciation of about 60% due to so much of tourism coming in.
Yes. So I think there is definitely a need to market Sri Lanka for what it is. There is definitely a need for a tourism or a brand Sri Lanka campaign, and I'm sure it will happen at some point. But I also think right now there is an opportunity to, in fact, I have to tell you this, just today, a friend of mine who recently had a holiday here, October, November, post-pandemic, texted me saying, Santosh, should we do a crowdsourcing funding activity to help the people of Sri Lanka? And I said, why are you saying this? He said, I just came back three months ago from the island. It's such a beautiful island. I feel I must do something for it. So, there is a impact that the island has on the people who have been here. We need to be able to reach out to those large numbers of people who've been tourists in Sri Lanka.
And let them be our ambassadors?
Let them be our ambassadors. That is a starting point for me. Correct. What is the form that ambassadorship can take? What is the form that communication can take is something we can discuss in detail later. It's not crystallized in my head. But this is possibly a start point for the re-emergence of the, or recapturing of the actual image that Sri Lanka needs to portray for itself.
Correct. Santosh, we also know that given some of the economic conditions the country is going through, and as a form of saving some of the dollar outflows, there's a lot of bans on imported products and imported brands as well. We see this happening in a very strong manner. So is this the time for Sri Lankan brands, made in Sri Lanka brands, to step up and go out there and satisfy the customer needs? Do you see that this as a window of opportunity for Sri Lankan brands?
See, I have two viewpoints on this, right? One viewpoint is, I think as Sri Lankan brands, in any case, the brand should now, and the private sector must come and be supportive and try to find ways of generating revenue and income which the nation truly and surely need. So to that extent, the private sector has to put its hands up. In that context, brands, local brands have to play a part, have to focus on quality. While of course there is this short-term opportunistic thing in the context of the fact that many imported brands are not there. But my view on this is that, 1 year later or 1.5 years later when the imported brands come back, you shouldn't end up having a mass migration to the higher quality products because your quality is not quite there.
Absolutely.
Then it's not a sustainable idea. You probably then will only make hay while the sun shines for 1.5 years and then probably have to go home after that. But that's not the point. The point is, how can we create and develop brands, local brands, which are of the quality of what I mentioned earlier in my earlier question.
International level quality.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, that's what we need. We need foreign dollars. We need money coming in. We need global brands which can go out into the international market, find a niche for itself, and be able to bring in revenue from foreign countries into Sri Lanka.
And we need people buying the made in Sri Lanka brands, not because it's cheap or not because there is no other option, but because the quality is right and it satisfies the brands, satisfy the quality aspirations of the people.
Yeah, I'll give you an example, right? There is a brand in India called Thumbs Up.
Yes.
Fact of the matter is, Thumbs Up is a cola.
Yeah. It was there before Coca-Cola. And
Exactly.
Pepsi,
And when Pepsi came
Taste the thunder, I believe.
there you go. And when Pepsi came into India, Thumbs Up gave it a really tough fight.
Correct.
Coca-Cola eventually bought it.
Yes.
And even as we speak today, Thumbs Up continues to be the #1 brand in India, cola brand in India. And Coke and Pepsi are #2 and #3. So there's a story there. I mean, you may be a local player, but irrespective of whether there are imported products or foreign brands coming in, you should be able to hold your own and continue to have your loyal customers stand by you irrespective of what happens.
Do you feel that, especially in the small and medium enterprise sector, that the business owners are not paying enough attention to the branding? Do you feel a problem like that in Sri Lanka? As somebody who moves a lot with the business community, do you have that feeling sometimes?
I would say it's not only the medium, small and medium sector. I would say even sometimes in big companies, the focus sometimes tends to be far more sales, which is right.
Correct.
You need to have sales orientation. But, there is also a marketing context in the context of brands, which digs deeper into the context of emotions and creating sustainable properties which can actually ride all the ups and downs that, economics and environment brings along with it.
Correct. Because people, if your product is being brought because it's a product, then people might always switch to something else. But if they are buying your product because of the brand, that's a relationship and people tend to stay with you.
Exactly.
So, Santosh, you mentioned a very important point there about sustainability, and we are going to come back to you on more details on that after the break. We will be back after this short break. Don't go anywhere. This is Bisnomics.
AMW විකුණු පාන විතරක්ම වෙන්නේ නැති ගන්නේ.
ඕන වාහනයක් ගන්නවා.
පරණ වාහනයක්
ගන්නවා.
පාර්ට්ස් හැම හොයා ගන්න අමාරු කාර් එකක්
ගන්නවා.
සල්ලි ගන්න විකුණනකන් ඉන්න වෙන්නේ.
පැය 3ෙන් සල්ලි දෙනවා.
ලීසින් කරලා තිබුණොත්
ලීස් එක සෙටල් කරලා අපි ගන්නවා.
කවකටත් එක ෂුවර් කරගන්න හැබැයි.
අපෙන් නොගත්තත් අපි ගන්නවා.
Welcome back to Bisnomics, your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes. Our focus today is on brand building during the tough times. How can brands connect with people despite all the negativity that is surrounding in the market? It's not something that we should argue whether we can do or not. There is a way. How do we do that? What's that way is our focus today. And I'm in conversation with none other than Mr. Santosh Mennon. Santosh, now we mentioned a very important word just before the break, sustainability. Now, by the pure definition, we say sustainable business is about doing business, doing brand building in a way where we enjoy the benefits today without destroying the potential benefits of tomorrow. That's the very textbook definition, as one would call it.
Sure.
But today, I believe in marketing, in branding, we have a bigger problem, Santosh, where we call it greenwashing. Companies that are hardly doing anything for making their brand sustainable, they are coming out there, they are advertising in big ways, saying this product is good, this is sustainable, that is sustainable. This has become a major problem. And in fact, there's only a very fine line between actual, honest, sustainable business brand building versus greenwashing. Santosh, my question to you, how fine is that line and how can a business avoid crossing over to the dark side?
Yeah. Young people who are the new people with purchasing power, they are engaging with brands and products not merely because of what that product delivers to them or what that brand communicates in terms of a benefit, but based on what that brand believes in. And that is becoming very important.
The brand's personality.
In terms of the brand's beliefs, if the brand believes in sustainability and makes specific investments in transparency, in showing its country of origin, things like that, and has a point of view in terms of ethical manufacture, younger people are willing to pay a premium because everyone realizes at some level that what we are doing is, otherwise is going to be extremely detrimental in the context of planet Earth. And younger people are far more aware of this than the older people.
Correct.
Given that context, brands are trying to cater to that segment and cater to that need. Some brands probably are not doing the full sustainable job, but trying to put out messaging which is about sustainability.
Correct.
There are some brands which are actually making that change. See, some of these changes can't happen overnight in any case because there is a manufacturing process in place, there is a certain system in which everything operates. For systems and operations to change, it does take time, and brands have to start making the journey. I have to say that there are many corporations who, having their finger on the consumer pulse, have actually started making significant changes. I'll take one global brand as an example. If you take a brand like Coca-Cola, I mean, over the years, so much scrutiny around Coca-Cola having large quantities of sugar in their drink, etc. And those things have come out in media in some ways. If you look at some of the new things they're doing, like Coke Zero, you can already see an
And
attempt.
I believe they have one venture where they're making T-shirts out of recycled Coke PET bottles.
Exactly. So there are several interventions that are being done by corporates, and this is just one example I'm giving you.
Correct.
Because they do understand, and corporates do understand that the new consumer, who's a younger consumer, is more aware and is actively looking for brands that share their view of the world and not just based on whether I like the taste of this product more or whether I don't.
And it's becoming harder to hide or kind of sweep things under the carpet as well, isn't it, Santosh? Because
Absolutely.
if you look at today, we saw a few months ago a leading food company in the world where an internal email got leaked out where they had discussed that most of the food items were actually not healthy for consumption. And that email somebody leaked out because today, especially the younger generation, they believe in doing activism in whatever job role they may be in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is the reality of the new world. The reality of the new world is that everything's under scrutiny, and you can't
Get away.
you can't, what you use the word greenwashing.
Yeah.
The greenwashing is not a sustainable idea. Let me put it that way, in the context of your question.
For sure.
Greenwashing is a temporary washing which will get wiped out or which will get blown away by the scrutiny of younger people who are very smart and know how to look at labels and identify the devil in the detail.
Santosh, when we talk about building brands in the digital world, so from physical space now we come to the digital world. How have the rules of brand building in the digital space changed the game of brand building, especially for marketers and brand builders such as yourself? And what are the most common mistakes to avoid when building brands on digital platforms?
Yes. Oh, there's a humongous change. And I think the fundamental change is the fact that when we looked at earlier communications and the way brands talk to consumers, brand owners had a message. The message would be put out in media. And some of the smart brand owners would then do research to figure out how the consumers interpret that message. That was the only way they could figure out how the consumer responded to the message and how the consumer is responding to the brand.
And that also figuring out the samples and all that were limited, was difficult to find and there used to be a certain scrutiny over whether that sample actually is giving the honest opinion and feedback as well.
Yes. In today's world, with social media, it's all two-way communication. When you put something out there, on social media, there's an engagement immediately from a set of customers and probably non-customers, and sometimes even from competitors trying to create their own little, tension in that whole environment. But at the end of the day, the relationship between the consumer and the brand owner has become far more intimate thanks to the way in which social media has actually shaped conversations. In the overall context of the digital media, it has also meant that the path from the idea of the brand being put into your head to purchase is just a click away. You know, in several countries today, from the moment you get to the stimuli, you can actually click on a banner which you might be interested in, and the next thing you know, you're actually making the right click so that the product is going to be either delivered to your home, or if it's a book, it's delivered to your Kindle.
Correct.
And you can straight away read it. So that path to purchase has also changed.
And I believe the cycle has been extremely shortened.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think the pandemic has hastened that. We all know that people who previously never went on the internet to do any purchases, by virtue of the pandemic, they have figured out how to go online on their smartphones.
And especially the 45 to 65 category of consumers, the more senior consumers, they've adopted digital in a very high speed.
Yes. So I mean, it's a, it's almost like the necessity is the mother of invention, right? I mean, so to that extent, this is such a necessary thing that people have had to invent and find ways of making sure that they get on to the internet and get on to finding ways of, navigating the internet for purchases, which has become a reality. But from a brand perspective, this has meant that digital is now playing an important role in terms of how brands communicate with consumers. The biggest mistake I still feel is that if consumers or marketers start looking at execution and tactics as being more important than the brand idea, that's where the issue is. Sometimes in the excitement of the new media, marketers tend to focus more on tactics of how we are going to reach the consumer.
Correct.
Rather than on the core voice of the brand, which needs to stay authentic and needs to stay consistent.
So you may say they get too much involved and delve too much into the analytics rather than focusing on the core message getting out there, the creativity part.
I mean, I would say, the dopamine and the oxytocin and the serotonin, that flow of love, reassurance, rewards, and whatever your brand might stand for, that final aspect needs to flow through the brand, irrespective of whether it's being communicated on television or whether it is being communicated through your mobile.
Understood.
And I think that's the point I'm actually trying to make.
Very thoughts there, Santosh. And on a final note, now we always talk about branding products, branding businesses, but the founder's personal brand, and we know the world and even Sri Lanka has seen certain legendary business founders, and we've had the pleasure of having some of them in discussion in Bisnomics as well, Santosh. Now, the founder's personal brand has a strong affiliation with the overall brand image of the organization. Of course, when you get to a multinational level and when you get to maybe a certain national scale, maybe the brand can escape from the founder's personal brand. But otherwise, a lot of businesses we see, they have a very strong connection with the founder's personal brand. Santosh, how can a business leader manage their own personal brand? Because we are all brands. Santosh, you are a brand. Myself as Tarindu, I'm a brand. From the moment we are given a name, I believe we are a brand. But only very few of us actually focus on building that brand and managing it out there. What is your advice to any business leader who is watching this show on building and managing their own personal brand?
Absolutely. Very valid question, Tarindu. And this is something I have been talking about a lot lately. I have done some sessions on the personal branding area recently. Just recently, I did something with a big multinational company.
Or the brand, building the brand, US we call it.
Yes, the personal brand. So I have a couple of very simple, clear thoughts. There's a population, I believe the world population is 7.8 billion. So I always ask people, potentially, how many personal brands exist? And the answer is very simple. 7.8 billion potential brands exist. Because I do believe that each one of us is distinct, unique in our own ways. And it is actually the steps to building a personal brand are very simple. You know, it's a 5-6 step process to building a personal brand. You need to discover your authentic voice, just as you discover your authentic voice for the brand.
Right.
Then you need to be able to express that authentic
Communicate
voice.
the message.
Express it either through words, spoken words, or written words,
Or
or
action.
through voice, or through video, or through action, but the action needs to be captured in some form.
Correct.
Then you need to project
And
it.
Santosh, just to add to what you were saying, we see the Ukrainian President Zelensky, how his personal brand has boomed over the last few weeks and how he's addressing different audiences, and he's even very nicely tailoring the message to match the different audiences. Probably his background as a comedian and actor is helping him there.
Yes.
But clearly he's putting his brand, his personal brand has boomed, and with that Ukraine also gets a lot of attention.
Absolutely. So this is another great example. That brings you to the third point, which is about projection. Very often I talk in meetings and talk about the fact that, have you ever put your own name on Google, done a search and checked what comes out? Because fact of the matter is, in today's world, before you meet anybody, you tend to do that. So we all have some kind of a digital footprint. If the digital footprint is unremarkable or non-existent, that's an indicator for you that some things need to change. Very often I find people coming to me and saying, I don't want to be in the social media space because of privacy issues and things like that. And I say to them, in today's world, you can take care of both. You can ensure that your bank account, the details about your personal information are all kept secure.
Correct.
But at the same time, use the power of social media to project and express your authentic voice that is uniquely yourself. And that's a very important aspect of personal brand building and brand building for a leader, being able to express it and project it.
Santosh, we normally used to say out of sight, out of mind, but I guess now since the world is going digital, I believe the real saying should be, if you are not online, then in the business community you are completely offline.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic quote. I'll remember that for future reference.
You are most welcome to use it.
Thank you.
Santosh Mennon, experienced and expert in brand building. Thank you so much for joining us today, sharing your valid thoughts. Your experience across so many different brands, across different countries and cultures simply amazed me, and I'm quite sure that our audience today also got so much of insight and valuable advice from you. Thank you for joining us, and wishing you good luck in building more brands and sending out more happy hormones to the Sri Lankans. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Tarindu. It's such a great pleasure to be on the show.
No matter what business you may be in, this is an opportunity to build a brand that will take a positive message to the community, to the society, and that will make your brand closer to the people and be nostalgic forever. I'm Tarindu Amarasekara, and no matter what business you may be in, have a profitable week ahead. I'll see you with the next episode. This is Bisnomics.